start. Good afternoon and welcome to the afternoon session. I'm Masakazu Ino, professor of Waseda University and one of the organizers of today's event. I'll be the dean of CIE in 10 days, so I'm still understudy for this role, but I'll do my best to play my role today. And we are very fortunate to have distinguished speakers in the afternoon. Let me introduce from my side Dr. Hanford from the University of Tokyo, and Dr. Sheila Smith from the Council on Foreign Relations, and Dr. Ito from Nagoya University, and Dr. Mark Williams from Akita International University. And they are going to make about 15-minute presentation each, 10 to 15 minutes presentations, please, and in this order. Let me just briefly talk about the current situation that Japan is now facing. As we have already heard from the morning sessions, as the entire world going through the globalization, Japan has been experiencing a sense of unprecedented stagnation in the past 2 decades, which is often called 2 lost decades after the burst of bubble economy in early 1990s. The concept of 2 lost decades is not only limited to economy, but also permeates in people's minds, and especially in the college-age generation. For them, their entire life has been coincided with the 2 lost decades. And Japan is also suffering from its population decrease and facing a rapidly aging society. The number of the 18 years old at the age of college entrance in 2011 was 1.2 million compared to 2.05 million in 1992. During the last 2 decades, the number dropped by almost half. The number of students going abroad to study has been decreasing since 2004, as you can see on this slide, with a significant drop of Japanese students studying in the United States. That's the middle line in red. Over the last 15 years, the number of Japanese students studying in the United States has dropped from almost 46,000 to 21,000, although the US still remains the most preferred destination. And during the same period, other Asian countries, such as China and India, have been experiencing strong economic growth and have sent increasing number of students abroad to study, as seen in this graph. Although a younger generation in Japan is often associated with their inward-looking attitude, it is necessary to understand the structural issues surrounding their academic and career decisions. And so, according to the Hillary Clinton, let me just read some of the quotes. The US-Japan alliance is the cornerstone of a system in the Asia-Pacific that has underwritten peace, stability, and prosperity for decades. We believe that this relationship is not only strategic, not only economic, not only political. We believe it is a noble cause, and it's one that we are absolutely committed to. However, she also continues, I'm a little bit concerned, which is why I wanted to raise this with all of you. As recently as 1997, Japan sent more students than any other country in the world to study in America. Today, Japan ranks 6th. And in the last 14 years, the number of Japanese students studying in America has dropped by almost 50%. And we are committed to doing whatever it takes to try to reverse this trend So we are redoubling our efforts to connect Japanese youth with American universities. And this was a remark made by Hillary Clinton. And this conference itself was originally initiated by Hillary Clinton's effort to reverse this downtown trend. So today, in the afternoon, we would like to hear these participants regarding how we can proceed to develop some sustainable, also very concrete measures. So shall we start with the Dr. Hanford from the University of Tokyo.
Good afternoon, everybody. First, let me say thank you to the USJI and Waseda University from the bottom of my heart for arranging today. I think it's a fantastic opportunity for us all to talk and to look at ways of improving this obviously very important relationship. And also thank you for putting it in Washington. This is my first time here, and I had some time yesterday to walk around, and I actually looked at some of the sites and bought a book of Walt Whitman's poems. So, kind of whatever happens, I've had a good time. And as you can tell from my accent, I'm not Japanese. So, and I'm not American. So I hope you don't think I'm an intruder. And in the spirit of internationalization, I hope you'll accept some of the things that I have to say. Okay, so I've labeled this talk towards a roadmap, finding the roads. This is obviously a huge issue that we're looking at, and 10 minutes is not a very long time. So I haven't tried to make a coherent argument. I've tried to I'm going to raise some issues. I'm going to tell you what we're doing at the University of Tokyo. And probably, if there is one kind of coherent thought to it, it's that we need a variety of approaches. And often the best relationships work at the local level, I think, and it's often boosting those. So, as I said, we'll look first at a couple of issues. There's some statistics on the relationship. You should have a handout on your desk. Mine's the less colourful one, the black and white one, of some statistics. I'll briefly refer to those, but I think Innocence has already mentioned a few of those. And then I say I'll finally tell you about what we're doing at the University of Tokyo, in the School of Engineering, which is where I'm based. I think we do need to confront the fact that we're in many ways preaching to the converted here, and not everybody sees the value of internationalization. And many people on the Japan side and elsewhere see internationalization as essentially the influence and kind of colonization by Western influence. And I think that's something that we need to address in the way that we offer incentives and the way that we try to promote the value of internationalization. And perhaps sometimes the expectations of institutions on the two sides of the Pacific can be different. Also, I think the statistics we'll look at in a minute often show that short-term exchanges are becoming increasingly popular. But do institutions like those? Do institutions offer enough support for those? Should institutions be trying to change people's opinions? Often we're talking about long-term approaches, whereas in fact the majority of exchanges are short-term, so I think that's an issue to consider as well. The issue as well of double-degree programs, this has been discussed a little bit, but is there really support on both sides for that? Are there other alternatives that might work better? And an issue that came up today a couple of times, for example, by Dr. Packard's speech, on support from leaders. And I'd like to talk a little bit about that now. I think in terms of, for example, boosting Japanese research, young researchers going abroad and promoting and encouraging young students to go abroad, we need strong support at the professor level, at the head of department level. And this doesn't always happen. There's a very kind of varied picture in terms of levels of involvement in internationalization. And obviously we need to make our case better, and we need to offer better incentives, and I think we need to try to engage with those at the top if we're going to get younger researchers to go abroad. There's not much point in talking about encouraging younger researchers going abroad if their heads of department and their professors are not going to let them. So I think that's something that we need to consider. Ino Sensei was just talking about the fact that there is a decline in the number of students going from Japan to the US. But this I think includes actual high school students as well, this graph, and it's about 59,000 students in total, about 24,000 going to the US. So it's still, the US is still a very, very popular destination for Japanese students. In the spirit of internationalization, to take on the devil's advocate role for a minute, perhaps Japanese students going to other countries is very good for internationalization, not just focusing on the US, but looking a bit broader than that. But that's not my opinion, I'm just saying it's devil's opinion. Okay, as I say, I've got this handout here, and we won't go through this in detail, but if you trust me, I'll just show this slide, which basically sums up the findings, and please, at your leisure, have a look at these findings from JASSO and Open Door and people like that. As I mentioned, many exchanges are short-term. The US is still very popular, despite an overall decline in Japanese numbers. And of course, as we've heard today, and we all know, that decline in Japanese numbers is bigger than just the relationship with the US. And that's a very big issue that needs dealing with, attacking in as many ways as possible. And also, the reality is there are more Japanese students to the US than vice versa. So, and that issue hasn't been discussed very much today. And America has a much bigger population. So, it would be nice if more US students came to Japan than is the case at the moment. And related to that, of course, is the issue of China. A lot of American students go to China, and perhaps Japan needs to make a better case for itself as a destination. Let me talk now about what we're doing in the School of Engineering at the University of Tokyo. I'll tell you some of the things that we're doing, like the bilingual campus, the Dean's Forum, and also the issue of online lectures. I hope I'm not giving away any institutional secrets when I say that not everybody at the University of Tokyo is equally enamored with the idea of internationalization. There's a lot of variety according to the different schools about how involved they are in internationalization, how keen they are. And I'm sure this isn't just the case with the University of Tokyo. I'm sure it's all institutions. Even within one department, we get a lot of variety. But that's the reality for us. The school that is most positive towards internationalization, that has the most international students, for example, is the Faculty of Engineering. And about 30% of our graduate students are from overseas, compared to about 10% for the institution as a whole. So the president of the university has been encouraging us very much to lead the way in internationalization. Because of that, an institution has been set up, the Institution for Innovation in International Engineering Education, which is quite difficult to say and remember, but that's where I work. And we're very much overseeing the internationalization process within the university. Obviously, Tokyo University has a lot of exchanges. It has 40 academic agreements with US universities. The most successful ones seems to be those that work at the departmental level. And 22 of these 40 are at departmental level. As I mentioned earlier, I think that the agreements, exchanges, things like this at the local level are often those that are most successful. UCB, I know, obviously has a huge number of exchanges, is a highly international university in the States, but they were telling me they only want agreements at the local level. They're not really that interested in kind of broad agreements between institutions. It's often the agreements between professors or those leading departments that lead to very rich exchanges. So going back now to the what we're doing in engineering, One thing we're doing is planning for a bilingual campus over the next 10 years to facilitate exchanges between students and academics. We're sending a lot of our researchers abroad. We're encouraging more researchers to come here. We're hoping that within the next 10 years, 50 to 70% of our lectures at the graduate school will be held in English. As Dr. Packard was saying, English is obviously a huge issue, and we're very much embracing that. Of course, not to everybody's agreement, but that's the way it's going. And there's continuous support for bilingualism at the student development and faculty development level. Also, something that we've done is set up the Dean's Forum. This is an agreement between these different institutions. As you can see, they're not all US, but three on that side. And there's also support from IBM. Dr. C.T. Cheng is actually the co-chair of the Dean's Forum. What is the Dean's Forum? Well, it's basically an agreement between the deans of these very leading schools of engineering around the world. Quite a small group, and it has various aims. For example, promotion of student exchanges, both long-term and short-term, development of academic programs, joint supervisions of PhD and Doctor of Engineering students, development of joint student research symposiums, development of advisory committee for academic engineering-focused textbooks, and the implementation of regular forums. For example, every year we will have a Dean's Forum, ideally in different countries. And the deans will get together, talk about how they can work more closely together and drive forward, in many ways, the solution of complex world problems that engineering can aid and help with. Because obviously, many of the world problems that are faced, things like March 11th of last year, are very, very complex, requiring many different solutions. And engineering is very well placed to deal with those, the engineers. I'm not an engineer, by the way, I should just say, so although I'm kind of promoting engineering, I'm actually from the humanities. I'm saying that in terms of their position, which I think is quite valid. And also the idea is that with development, through the development of symposiums, student-led symposiums, then some of these problems can be dealt with. For example, this year there's going to be a symposium between Imperial and University of Tokyo, looking at post-March 11th situation and how it can be dealt with in greater detail, how some solutions can be arrived at. And that is a student symposium, not a Dean's symposium, but organised by the Dean's Forum. So those are very much the aims of the Dean's Forum. Something I'd like to mention before I finish as well is the value to promoting student exchanges and academic exchanges of online lectures. There's a very successful program set up by MIT and the University of Tokyo in the departments of mechanical engineering. And there's online lectures been going on for about a year and a half now. And these have proved very popular with both sides. And what's happening is there are far more exchanges happening between these two departments now than had been the case 2 or 3 or 4 years before. So through online lectures, there's a good promotion of student exchanges and researcher exchanges. A similar thing is happening on a more local level for us between Seoul National University and Tsinghua. And again, these are building much stronger links between the different engineering members. And I think through the use of online internet-based learning, there's a great deal of potential there that hasn't really been explored for developing much deeper links. And a lot of these, although the relationship, a bit like a lot of marriages nowadays, they start online, but then they end up as actual relationships. So, I think we should explore that one more. Just very briefly, my colleague last year talked, Egawa Sensei, she talked about the plan of the University of Tokyo to change the academic year, which of course would also facilitate the exchange between the US and European universities and several other universities and the University of Tokyo. So, of course, it hasn't been decided officially yet, but there would be lots of advantages if that did happen. Thank you very much.
the handboard. Let's hold the questions and answer sessions until everybody finishes. Then we will have the some discussion sessions. So next speaker will be Dr. Smith.
Thank you. I'm delighted to be here. I'm not sure where to put all my paperwork. Can I just put this? I think I may be the only person on the panel who is not currently in a university setting at the moment. So first let me introduce myself as somebody who's worked on Japan affairs, Japan studies for a long time, but I am currently now in a think tank environment. So a lot of what I do now is look at younger people who want to come into the policy world, who want to come into the Japan field, and they come to me and talk to me about what do I do, how do I develop my professional skills, and they may already have some background in a university setting, they may be undergrads or grad students, but what they really want to do is find a place to use that knowledge, experience, and expertise. So I am delighted with USJI's invitation to join us the conversation today. Lets me talk a little bit about the longer kind of terrain in which we're trying to talk about educational opportunities for our young people in both societies. I think it would be fair for me to say that I've been on virtually every end of the spectrum of this process. I've been a student who studied abroad in Japan. I was a grad student at Columbia, I got a PhD, I taught at Boston University and tried to help students get into the JET program. So I'm listening to Dr. Packard and other speakers here in terms of what are good programs, what are good approaches, and I listened also to what you're about to do at the graduate level of Waseda. And I think we're all in this room very, very convinced that more needs to be done. And the question really is the resources that we can bring to bear on this problem. And what we're really trying to talk about is priorities. Not that we don't want any bit or piece of this support not to happen, but rather where do we put our priorities. So I thought today I'd share a little bit of my thoughts over my career, but also where I am today in the policy think tank world, spanning it out just a little bit from the university setting. The most fundamentally important thing to do, and I think every speaker so far today, and I know in previous USJI seminars has emphasized this, is creating the infrastructure. If you do not have the facility, whether it's economic facility or the understanding of how to get opportunities to study abroad as an undergraduate, you can't do it. Lots of students who would come to me and say, I would love to go to Japan and study, but I won't be able to graduate on time. My parents won't let me because it's expensive. I go over there and the credits won't transfer. Why do you think it's so important for me to go and do this? And so the setting in which study abroad programs is placed, the university setting, is something we should protect and maintain and sustain. Because for most undergraduates, without that setting in your home institution that allows you to go away for a semester or a year and come back and still get your degree on time, without those settings, most of our undergraduates, frankly, would not be able to study abroad. Now, the numbers on the Japanese side, I think, are pretty distressing, and I think everyone here has noted that. I too have a handout, and it's the same sources that Dr. Hanford used, the open source material, and it's on the Japanese side of the equation. And I think that's really, at the undergraduate level, the study abroad infrastructure building, in addition to the graduate exchange program, is where most of the concentration, I think, of that infrastructure building effort on the Japanese side should be dedicated. Because there's no incentive, or there's very little reward, to put it that way, on the Japanese side for most of the students that I talk to in Japan for studying abroad. And I think we've all read the media coverage of, well, younger students are more inward looking, it's more comfortable to stay home. But I think if that infrastructure was in place, to allow study abroad to be a normal experience for Japanese undergraduate students. And I agree with you, whether it's the United States or to Great Britain or to China or to South Korea, I don't think that's an issue. But it is the comfort of, the facility of allowing that to be and expecting that to be part of a undergraduate education, I think is really most important. Beyond that, you get into the professional and research PhD training, the graduate student training, which is essential. And again, USJI and Waseda are moving, I think, in a very innovative direction in that way. I was at the Social Science Research Council and worked on the institution of the Abe Fellowship Program, which is over a decade now, or maybe almost 2 decades, my age is showing here. But CGP, the Center for Global Partnership, the Japan Foundation Center for Global Partnership, invested in training at the professional level for academics and professional researchers, not just PhDs, but others as well. And that investment has paid off in a generation of young academics and other professional researchers in the United States and in Japan. So there are models out there building new initiatives that are very focused on a particular niche, and that infrastructure piece is very, very important. I think all of us here, though, understand that globalizing our national educational institutions is what we're all talking about, whether it's Japan or whether it's the United States. We had a gathering at the Council on Foreign Relations early last spring. There were the university heads of about 60 or 70 American higher educational institutions. And everybody, I was on a panel talking about events in Asia, so it was a kind of a current topics in Asia discussion. But everybody on in that forum came to the council to learn more about how to globalize their thinking about what the educational needs are going to be. Now, these are educators, these are men and women who know how to educate. But what they didn't know is the kinds of issues, topics, and engagements of the future that they should be investing in, and how to structure an educational environment to make sure that it was ready for Americans to compete and to respond to the needs of the globalizing economy. So the national conversation on globalization is part and parcel, I think, of what we should be doing. Reaching out to other leaders, not just educational leaders, but policy leaders, business leaders, social entrepreneurs, other sectors of our society, so they can help us craft and think about longer-term visions. Now, that's the infrastructure piece. The second piece I thought was really important, and again, it's been discussed a little bit here, which is really about creating professional opportunities for younger, emerging graduates, whether it's undergrads or BAs or grad school level. I can't tell you the number of young people who come to me and say, I've invested, I've made the commitment, I've done something different, made different choices, but I don't know where to find a job. And this is where I think, and for those of you from the private sector who are in the audience, this is where we need your help particularly, because the people who really have made the investment in learning about Japan, learning about Asia more broadly, need a place to go. And we as educators, I think, need to be making sure that we're telling people that we need places for people, that if we're struggling and striving to educate, then we need to make sure that there's a place and there's a vehicle and there's an educational, informative process that will allow these young people to get jobs. I have a RA who came to me, thank goodness, because he's a wonderful research associate, but he had been a president's fellow for our government. So he had gone through a very competitive process in Washington. He got a step into the policy-making process in Washington. He was all ready to go. And not one of the jobs listed for almost 2 years running was an Asia-related job. So our federal government was asking for people with area studies expertise. I mean, they had looked for these candidates. He had been awarded at the top of his class, right, national competitors, and not one job had Asia embedded in the job. And so his choice was to take this great honor, right, and go do this job and be a policy wonk in Washington, but have nothing to do with Asia. And instead, he decided to come work for me, so I'm terribly grateful. But again, these avenues into our governments, our private sectors, our social leadership, these have to be constructed. They have to be priorities for us to use these young people, not leave them floundering at the end of a JET program or at the end of some kind of longer graduate experience and not be able to find employment. And I think the work here for us in the United States is as important in that respect as it is in Japan. Let me finally just say my last point, which is, again, we're all in this room, I think, very dedicated to the task of a more globalized education, a greater bilateral effort for building it, making it possible for young people. But we're all cognizant of the limited resources available. So more slots for foreign students at schools, more slots, more money, more fellowships, absolutely. But in a limited resource environment, we ought to stop and consider what is it that we really want to collaborate on? What is it that we want our students to be studying together? And I'm not saying that one topic should take precedence over another, certainly by no means. But if we have to choose, and if we have to sort of focus on where we want to help support educational opportunity and collaboration, then I think there is going to be implicitly or explicitly some prioritization that has to come. Let me just throw some ideas out. I'm not trying to prioritize, so don't misinterpret me here. But what we normally do, and again, most of us, myself, come from an area studies background. I was like George Packard. I went to Japan. I studied. I moved around the country. I backpacked. I didn't get to go squid fishing. I've always wanted to go. But I instead went to Okinawa and Ishigaki and went, scuba diving instead. So everybody has their experience, and it's a fundamentally valuable experience as a young adult. Absolutely. But what we're really talking about here is knowledge of each other. And I think one of the pieces of the puzzle, and one of the basic assumptions that we just should make explicit, is our investment in knowledge of each other. Japan of the United States, Japanese of the United States is really fundamentally important to this relationship. And I don't say that because I sit in a policy environment, but I just say it's just a fundamental assumption that we all make. Therefore, we need good teachers. We need Professor Kubo, who's maybe here and maybe not, who's in American Studies. We need good Japan experts. We need that infrastructure to continue. Our second piece of the puzzle, and here's where some of the foundations lately have moved, and that is in our areas of shared purpose, for lack of a better word. Issues of scientific orientation, climate change, right? We were talking about engineers, for example. The issues that we fundamentally, or both of our societies, will need to invest in and work on to devise problems for the future. Those are areas absolutely worth putting at the top, or near the top of our priority list. And that's scientists, it's medical, it's across the board. But we ought to at least identify some key priorities where we ought to work together, functional areas. And finally, and this is a little close to my heart, so I just tolerate me for one last minute, and I'll tell you that I think maybe this is a more policy-oriented orientation, but the US and Japan have much to learn from each other. But we also ought to be encouraging our students to learn about the rest of Asia together. And I'll tell you, I had a very eye-opening and wonderful experience, not at Waseda, but at Keio University when I went as a mature researcher. I worked with Kokubun Ryosei and Soya Sensei and others at their Institute of Northeast Asian Studies when I was doing research on Japan. And at their seminars, were, with the exception of me, everybody could speak 3 languages, Chinese, Japanese, and English. They could talk about, Chinese scholars could come and talk about healthcare in Beijing, and they could do it in Japanese or Chinese, or English for me. But there's a dialogue and there's an educational focus that we ought to have, and this is more maybe for the Americans in the audience, which is in building structures that allow Americans with Japanese counterparts to be in conversation with the rest of the region. And it is there, I think, that perhaps Americans have more catching up to do than your scholars of Northeast Asia and Japan. But I think we need a lot of concentration on how Japan and American researchers, again, across fields, can work more closely to build a sustained collaboration in the Asia Pacific. And on that note, let me stop here. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Smith. The next speaker will be Dr. Ito from Nagoya University.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Masahiro from Nagoya University. Actually, we thought that we were going to introduce our program supported by this Reinventing Japan, but it seems the nature of this conference is more on the international education and exchange, sharing the education between Japan and the US. So I'm gonna briefly, go over the slide I prepared. Otherwise, my boss is gonna kill me. And I wanna talk a little bit my own opinion. This is not the opinion of Nagoya University. This is my personal, individual opinion. Please keep it in mind. So the title of our project is Japan-U.S. Advanced Collaborative Education Program. We call it JASSO. And okay, so I'm going to skip the background because this is too obvious. So we increase the internationality of young scientists and engineers. Oh, by the way, this is for engineering students. And if you look at that chart, so if you look at this table, so most of the undergrad, the number of undergrad goes to most of the undergrad goes to masters, proceed to masters, but not many people are going to the industry directly. But after spending masters, there are not many people, which is many students going to PhD, which is another problem. But let's talk it offline if you want. So anyway, the bottom line is the majority of Japanese engineers are master's postgraduates. And also there are a few international programs for master's students, at least in Nagoya University. So supported by this program, we decided to give opportunities for graduate students for international education. So since it is not for undergrad, this is for master's level, we're doing this research-based education through co-study and co-work of Nagoya and the US graduate students. So the expected outcome is, first of all, of course, stimulate Japanese students and learning students to study and research from US university students. Well, unfortunately, for some reason, US university students are more highly motivated compared with Japanese students. This is the reality. And also, of course, encourage Japanese students to study abroad. And the other thing is experience diverse culture. In Japan, well, I don't want to talk about politics here, but most of the Japanese people living in Japan is Japanese. So we are not very good at to be mixed with other cultures. So but this is a very important part of life. So we think that sociality with non-Japanese people is another important factor, and of course English, as you know. For U.S. students, experience through Japan is the most important thing, I think. For hospitality, reliability, beauty of the country, which I'm proud of. Those are Japan is I believe it's a famous country, and people of course know how it is like, but seeing is believing. By coming here, they can experience and they feel more clearly. So our partner university is University of Michigan and UCLA, and we have conducted summer program with the University of Michigan this year. Actually, we have been conducting. So let me briefly introduce what we are doing and we have done. So summer program 2012, and Nagoya University, we've invited 9 UM students, and they paired with 9 Nagoya University grad students so that they can work together. It consists of intensive lectures, research internship, industry visits, Japanese, and workshops. On the other hand, at the University of Michigan, actually it's still ongoing. And actually, I'm flying to Michigan tonight to check if they're performing well. So from August to the end of September, and 16 grad students have been visiting there and doing mainly on research. What we have done at Nagoya University is, so like I said, well, this year, that Fukushima and the earthquake happened last year, but still it's ongoing issue, and we are kind of leading, well, it's not kind of, I believe. We are one of the leading countries when it comes to energy storage or green vehicles, future cutting technologies. So we decided to give some lectures on energy storage like batteries and also green vehicles, because Nagoya is right next to Toyota, and we have more chance to interact with Toyota or other Mitsubishi or those kind of company people. And we did actually visit industry, Toyota Motors and Mitsubishi Motors. And they are officially exchanged. And research internship we've done, each student was distributed to each group and did some type of research. I don't know why I did that. and a workshop and a farewell party. Like, oh, by the way, this is important. This is the project leader. So I have to tell it. And we had, well, I believe they had quite a good time, and this is some feedback from them. I don't know, want to go over the detail, but I think it was whatever. Good. Okay, so on the other hand, what they're doing, I mean, Nagoya University students are doing in Michigan, well, basically this is research-oriented, research-based. They are doing a wide variety of things, basically based on their study in Nagoya. And I don't know how they're performing. I'm checking, and I can update later after tomorrow. Anyway, so okay, so this is the future plan of the project. So we are now we're trying to establish a credit exchange program based on research, because again, this is for masters. So most likely this is achieved sometime soon, hopefully by the end of this year. So independent research in Nagoya, in University of Michigan is going to be officially transferred to Nagoya University's credit. We call it US Research Project, and then vice versa. So from the next year, this is going to be more official. And maybe we're hoping that by the time we finish this program, we actually make this collaborative graduate school. Basically, what this is basically increase the number of credits to transfer officially, and to promote the student exchange more actively, maybe faculty as well. And simultaneously, once this system was set up, probably we want to increase the number of universities partner so that we can get more students from all over the world. The lower table is the projected student exchange through this program. So this is the introduction. Do I have a couple minutes? Okay, I have 5 minutes. So from here, this is my personal opinion. So as everybody here in this room know, the internationalization of Japanese is quite a big issue. And my mentor, by the way, I was in US for 4 years until this February, and during that period, my mentor was the Dean of Engineering School at Kyoto University, and we talked quite a lot because he had in that position, he wanted to change, and of course he did know that internationalization is a big issue. I strongly recommended him to apply TOEFL as an English test for undergrad. Actually, they are doing that for grad student, but TOEFL, but grad student, it is something, but it is more appropriate from my view that applying TOEFL as English test for it's like for entrance examination is more appropriate. That's my view, and hopefully there is a so-called center test. I'm not sure everybody in this room are familiar with it. It's like SAT in US. So they do have their own English test, but if we could substitute it to TOEFL, probably it's way better. I don't know if it's feasible in the sense of politics or whatever. That's the one thing. The other thing is there are quite a few faculty studying abroad, including mainly in US, and stay a couple of years supported by JSPS or MEXT to research for conducting research. But if they could teach in English after returning to Japan, it is a huge benefit, I believe. From what I see, even if they spend like 2 years, even 3 years, they probably speak English and they don't want to let their English deteriorate, but they don't have opportunity to teach in English. And it is huge trouble. This is beneficial for both sides. Students can learn something in English and get opportunities to talk in English or to think in English. And also for the faculty who spend quite, a couple of years abroad in the English environment, who still can keep their English ability good enough for a long time. there are another couple of things, but probably this is, I would like to wrap up. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Ito. The last speaker will be Dr. Williams
from Akita International University.
Good afternoon, everybody. The wheel has come full circle and we're back to the Queen's English. So I'm another imposter trying to talk about Japan-US relationship from a third perspective, but I hope, as Michael has said, looking from the outside does have something to offer. I too, like Ito-sensei, am torn between introducing the project that our particular university, AIU, has been funded for under the Reinventing Japan scheme, but also to try and take that a bit further to bring it closer to what we're really focusing on today. So I'm going to start with an overview of what we've been doing and what we were funded to do, and then we'll try and add a few thoughts, as I say, from an outsider's perspective. My background is that I was teaching Japanese studies in the UK for 20 years, and arrived in Akita about a year ago, and within 12 hours of arriving, two things happened. One, there was a message from the Ministry of Education saying, we have been funded for this project, so get on with it. Second, I was summoned to the President's office, can you please be in charge of it? That was within 12 hours of arrival. So suddenly my brief and my expectations changed. If you look at our webpage, our goal, our mission is there, and it's very simple. But without any flesh and bones, that means absolutely nothing as far as I was concerned. And I really, when I arrived in Akita, wasn't quite sure if this had any meaning or how this was interpreted. But I very quickly learned that there are one or two things unique about our institution. I won't read the slide, but just to point out a few things really germane to what we're talking about today. Firstly, all our students have to spend 1 year overseas. So all the issues about studying abroad are non-issues as far as we're concerned. If anything, the issue is the other way around. With the best will in the world, I think most of us, we will all agree that studying abroad has to be a benefit to the students, but inevitably there are going to be problems. There are going to be one or two students who, perhaps with the microphone off, one isn't 100% competent of studying abroad. There are issues maybe there that, with a curriculum whereby there's no path to graduation without studying abroad. We do have actually some issues that we are trying to address at the moment. All our courses are taught in English entirely. We're the only campus, I think, in Japan where everything is done in English, certainly in the classroom. Not so much outside the classroom, but half the faculty are non-Japanese. Most of the Japanese faculty have overseas qualifications. And so lots of things whereby the university, which is small and new, it was only founded in 2004, are trying to really take things, I think, breakneck speed, trying to take things forward in terms of this globalization agenda. And I think the heart of our bid was the fact that, and this was a bid put together by my colleagues before my arrival, was that we felt the first three, the black categories here, were already covered by our curriculum, by our ethos, by what we were trying to do. We were developing the communication skills, not just by making everything taught in English. We also have a second foreign language policy whereby virtually all our graduates do have to have a second foreign language. Most of our graduates are Japanese, but not all. We felt the intercultural understanding, global competency were covered by the time spent abroad in particular, and the critical thinking. The ones in red were things that we really felt we needed to work on. We felt, perhaps taking it more broadly, Japan needed to work on a bit more. And that was what really was behind the project we put together. And it led to a bid to the ministry along these lines, a PBL, a project-based learning project, which was meant to take our study abroad experience one step further. I'll try and go through this very briefly. Basically, it's to get 5 to 7 of our students, combined with 5 to 7 from partner US institutions, together to tackle common local issues. And the students would form a team of 14, 16, 18 students, one faculty member from either side, one of our faculty and one of the US partner faculty, coming together for what we envisage will be an 8-week intensive program. Perhaps in the summer, perhaps in the winter, American students can come and enjoy the snow of Akita in the winter, where they would take a very specific local issue, something particularly relevant to Tohoku or Akita itself, which had a similar counterpart issue on the American side. And then the students would get together and spend most of the time in the field working with relevant communities, local politicians, whatever it might be that was specific to that problem. So we have one project that is focusing on the aging issue, which is a major problem in Akita. We have another one on social well-being, where we're working with Dickinson College in Pennsylvania on an issue there, which is germane to both sides. We have another one working with the University of Utah, where we're looking at disaster risk management. And in each case, these have been tailor-made with the interests of particular faculty in mind, designed to get students involved in the field process. And these are our current partners at the moment. As it's expanding, we intending to take this further. This is how we envisage it. As I said, it's an 8-week program, 4 weeks in the States, 4 weeks in Akita. Each of the two halves would have a pattern like this. First week, when the students would have an omnibus series of lectures from faculty, followed by a second week in the field, really working with the community on the relevant issue, then going back and analysing the data, coming up with some kind of ideas, some proposals maybe to feedback, maybe to Akita Prefectural Government, to Pennsylvania authorities, whatever it may be, and then to write up the report at the end. They would then, most of these are envisaged starting in the US, then the whole group travelling back to Akita and doing the same thing, exactly the same thing, working on the same issue on the Akita side, and come up with a final report at each half, the final report at the end of the whole thing being much more of a comparative report. And to see how it works, our students will start off by doing their regular work in Akita, will then start their mandated 1-year study abroad program, do regular coursework at the US counterpart for 2 semesters approximately, and at that point we start the 4 weeks in the States, being joined by a group of 5 to 7 of their American counterparts. In each case, a faculty member then joins them. I think this slide will work. And they spend the month working on the issue. They then travel back to Akita and do the same thing in Akita, coming up with a report before completing the process. This is just one example of how we've set this up. This is what we're doing with Dickinson College, called Sustaining Community Health and Wellbeing, which is an issue that particularly Dickinson College has been working on for a long time. They have a vast experience of working on such PBL projects around the world. And these are the particular issues that the faculty concerned have come up with. But the important thing at the end, that there are hopefully going to be some policy actions, propositions, which will come out of this project based upon the PBL research that's done by the students, with the faculty serving as facilitators rather than as the lead, we hope. So we've got a mix of the university getting out into the community, and particularly as a public university in Japan, that's really important for us. A lot of our funding is coming from the prefecture, so we do have to show how we're repaying the community for the taxpayers' money, and involving the students in that mix. And these are the expected outcomes. This is copied from the original application. Again, the black, the things that we feel were covered before the application went in. The red is what the Japanese would call plus alpha, what we're adding to that, hopefully. This is the hopeful benefits of getting students engaged in this way. Linked to that, and this is really taking me onto my own thoughts in a sense, is a faculty collaboration arena where the results of these different undergraduate programs are going to be shared by faculty. We're having certainly one big annual conference a year, either in Akita or in the States with one of our partners, in which the lessons that have been learned through this expertise are going to be shared, and the relevant recommendations will then be sent forward to the relevant authorities. All of them link to this big catch buzz phrase at the moment in Japan of globalization, how that can actually feed into these local issues, taking globalization to the local level under the spirit of what's now called globalization. Having come then to Japan from a UK environment, these are some of the thoughts that have come to me looking at this project. How can it help answer the question we're really looking at today, which is expanding the numbers of exchange students, improving the quality of the exchange experience, making sure that it's not just box ticking and number crunching, but actually through the experience of, I think, ever closer collaboration with a limited number of partners, the benefits of the mutual benefits can really be used. In the UK, we talk an awful lot about research-led teaching. It's become a buzz phrase. That and impact are the two words that you can't get around a British university without talking about. Research-led teaching is much more than simply professors teaching their own specialist subject, teaching about their PhD. It may start there, that may be part of it, but it's much more getting the students involved in the research experience. Looking backwards, that is, I feel, exactly what the Akita project is trying to do. Whether we'll succeed is a different matter. But the attempt is there to get students to understand the concept of research, to get them involved in perhaps some fairly low-level research, but the notions behind research, getting them familiarised with quantitative, qualitative ideas, the mechanisms they're going to need, the tools they're going to need if they're going to go to grad school. And that is all part of building up to the PBL experience as we've led it. So I think the research-led teaching notion is something that we can all perhaps bear in mind. Through the experience of either sending our students in big, ever, hopefully, increasing numbers, both ways, and as my colleagues on the panel have said, it does need to be a two-way process. It doesn't, and not just the US, Japan, but the world is out there, the world is our oyster, and we need to reap the benefits of that in so many ways, one of which is going to be getting that critical thinking mindset, which a research-led teaching program can instill. Also, having come from a British university environment, I see lots of ways in which this can help us perhaps in our research environment in our home universities. The use of mentor-mentee relationships. My experience of Japanese universities is rather limited to Akita and one or two universities in Tokyo, but the notion of actually pairing researchers together, not necessarily senior colleagues mentoring junior colleagues and helping them to publish, although that's clearly very important, but we all need help. We all need people who will read our papers. We all need people who will work with us and with the students to get that research output up to scratch. And some establishment of perhaps the more formal mentor-mentee relationships can be helpful. How do we evaluate individual research activity? This is a big issue around the world, and if I have time, just very briefly at the end, I'll just introduce one methodology, which is what the UK has arrived at in a second. But how the research output can be evaluated, how we can actually use that for individual tenure decisions and all of that are ways in which I believe some of the PBL approach that is being adopted here can actually enhance. And that can go further to the research culture of the whole university. How are we evaluating the research culture of our institutions? It's not just number crunching, it's not just the number of papers published in peer-reviewed journals by individual members of the faculty. There's more to research culture than that, and again, involving the students in that process can only be helpful as far as I'm concerned, and it can help to develop that broader and deeper culture. And finally, the more we perhaps as USJI and other people interested in these issues, and the issues of exchange of ideas, of collaborative research, collaborative teaching, all of which are not discrete units that come together or need to come together in a very practical way. How can we use that to actually influence the national picture? And I certainly see vast differences between how this is done in the UK, the US, and in Japan. So just finally then, how it's done in the UK, and I'm not for a moment advocating this to be taken over because there are major problems with it, but just to present it in a fairly neutral manner, we do have now a government-sponsored, it does cost a lot of money, Research Excellence Framework. Some of you may know it by the earlier acronym of RAE, the Research Assessment Exercise, which is now out of date. It's really the same thing, whereby every single faculty member in a UK higher education institution must submit his or her top 4 publications from the previous 5 years on a 5-yearly cycle for evaluation by a panel of worthies and experts in that field, about 80 different panels. I personally, being a Japanese studies person, would always submit to the East Asian Studies panel. One's work would then go up to the panel and would come back, not with an individual grade for each piece of work, that would be too difficult, but certainly with a grade, an aggregate grade for the whole of that particular department. I came from Leeds University. Leeds University would submit to the Asian Studies panel, and about a year later, back would come the grade from that panel for the entire Leeds University East Asian output. And the important thing here is, on the basis of that, David Cameron decides how much money to give to Leeds University East Asian Studies in a very, very tangible way. I'll never forget, I happened to be head of department on the last census day when results came out. It was December 2010, I think it was. All the deans had to be in their office by 6:30 a.m. for a phone call from the Vice-Chancellor in case there were some terrible results, so that we could be forewarned, not to say to the press. And if there were any drastic results, certainly jobs were at stake. Tenure is not a British notion, and there were certainly cases of individual faculty and or whole departments losing their internal institutional funding as a result of this. So clearly I'm not advocating this as a panacea. It's not. It is one way. It does have some advantages. It has plenty of disadvantages, but it's one way in which this research culture can be evaluated. I think the point I'm trying to make is that somehow we need to make sure that the evaluation of all our institutional exchange work is somehow formalized in whatever form that might take. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Williams. We have about 10 minutes left for this session, so shall we first start with the few comments from our panelists, if you have some additional comments? Or shall we take the... Okay, then in that case, let's take questions from the floor. The microphone is yours.
Hello, I'm Mark from Japan-U.S. I was just wondering, I've been hearing a lot of rumors that University of Tokyo will be changing, or maybe changing to a fall starting academic year. And with your programs that are working with U.S. universities, do you think it's beneficial for all your universities to change to a fall academic year to continue these programs that you have, or all of Japan, all the universities changing?
That's a big question, isn't it? And a big topic, because of course there are so many ramifications if this change is made. You know, so much of the Japanese year starts in April. Not only the cherry blossoms, you know, employment is a huge thing. And, you know, will companies employ people if the academic year starts in the fall? or in autumn. So I think, you know, I hope Tokyo University does make this change. I think it would be a good change, but it's not a simple situation. And I suppose because of the fairly unique position that University of Tokyo holds in Japan, it may be the best placed institution to make this change, if it's going to be successful, I think. And I do hope other institutions come involved too. But of course the big issue is really, I think, jobs. So for the employers out there who we've been talking to, you know, this hopefully will happen in collaboration, and this is why it's a very long-term project. This is not going to happen next year, but various things need to be sorted out. But it would be advantageous in many ways, I think. But that's me as a non-Japanese person speaking. So I know that there's a lot of people who are against this as well, and for very valid reasons. But I do think the advantages outweigh the disadvantages. That's my position.
If I could just add to that, I fully agree that there are serious issues here to consider, and that the employment issue is one. And without a culture change on that particular issue, I think there'll be major problems. At the moment, the sense that one has to enter the company start on April the 1st is so deeply embedded that without that being questioned, and the sense that one doesn't have to necessarily follow that mold, then employers are really going to struggle really to come to terms with that. The other issue that is always raised in Japan is that of the gap year. What do students do in that 6 months in between the gap term? And I think it's fair to say that most of the people I talk to say it's a wasted 6 months. I hear that all the time. It's either a wasted 6 months, it's financially crippling if the 18-year-olds are going to be staying at home and dependent on parents for another 6 months or something like that. It prolongs the period when parents are responsible for education an extra 6 months. Speaking personally though, coming from a country where I think it's true to say about 20% of all university students have taken a gap year before they start, and a full gap year that is, it's a totally different concept. In the UK, the gap year has nothing to do with the university at all. The university doesn't touch it. Simply when you apply to the university through the application process, you tick a box saying 1 year deferred entry. And that's it. The university doesn't need to know any more than that, doesn't want to know any more than that. The sense of giving credits for that gap year and things like that doesn't come into the equation. And then the student decides for themselves how they're going to spend that year. I mean, in most cases what happens is 6 months earning enough money to go off and have a jolly good trip around the world or do something the other side of the world. My own daughter spent 6 months teaching English in Chile before going back to university and things like that. So there are ways in which it doesn't have to be crippling for the parents, but again, that culture change is what's going to lead that.
Thank you very much. Okay.
Yes, Dave Fitzgerald, retired State Department, now private consultant. I had a question about the general trends that were highlighted at the beginning of the session, the sort of declining numbers of Japanese coming to the U.S. And I guess not much of a increase at all in Americans going to Japan. But I'm taking the points that were made by Mr. Hanford at the beginning and by Sheila Smith in her comments. There seem to be, beneath those general trends, perhaps in engineering, there's more of an exchange already. Slightly different trend patterns than you would find for the overall. If you went below the sort of general trends, are there certain areas of academic experience where exchanges are actually improving? Or I was thinking that perhaps, for example, referencing Sheila's remarks, a lot of emphasis in the U.S. about study of Japan, but if you're not going to get a job related to Japan, why study? Why go into it? You see the increase now in Americans studying China, but that's a reflection of the assumption that they're going to get a job back here in the U.S. on something related to Japan, but that's sort of out the window. But and many of the Chinese and Koreans coming here or Indians are studying engineering perhaps. They're not studying anything about American political culture or language or whatever. Or maybe they get the language somewhere else. But it seems that perhaps there's more below the surface than some of these very general trends. Whether any of the panel want to comment on that.
I can't give you statistics. It's a great question, but I can't give you the breakdown of disciplinary differences. But two things sort of strike my mind and worth pursuing to get the data to see if it's right. I was a social science major, right? And a PhD in social sciences. And in the social science disciplines, there's a broad range of variety in terms of whether you need field research or not, right? If you're an anthropologist in some parts of the political science field, yes, you do. You need to go do field research. If you are a more quantitatively inclined discipline, field research is statistical analysis. In other cases, you don't need the time abroad. I went to Todai to do my dissertation research, right? You weren't there yet, I'm sure, but yes, I went to Todai. I think so. There's a depending on what field you're in, right? The incentives to study abroad, be it acquisition of engineering expertise in a culture or a university setting that has more advanced knowledge than perhaps your home country, or in a field where Japan's expertise is more developed than in the United States, for example, it matters. So your field choice of expertise matters, I think, in terms of your discipline's reward. On the Japan passing or the China-U.S., CULCON is meeting right now, right? And CULCON, as you know, probably is the US-Japan conference on cultural and educational exchange. And I'm drawing here on a report that was written by Dr. Bruce Stronach, who's the dean at Temple. And it's part of their advisory. Okaido-san, you can say more about this if you'd like, but it's part of a kind of a task force dedicated to trying and understanding beyond the numbers. And so he's taken a first cut at this. And one of the things that he found, and I'm going to quote from it here because it speaks to your question about what's under the surface here. On the U.S. side, right? He argues that U.S. students studying abroad between 1997-98 and 2010-2011 increased 250%. So more Americans are going abroad, right? Looking back over the last decade, right? The number of U.S. students studying in Japan increased by 300%. So of the people who are going to Japan, there's still more Americans going to Japan. So there's not an interest factor, right? Now, if you looked at the China number, which would be answering your question, what is the growth in the number of Americans going to China? That's not in the report, so I can't give it to you. But it's not that it's at the expense of Japan interest. And I thought that's an interesting point that we wouldn't normally appreciate. On the Japanese side, it's what I passed out in the open source, and I think Michael also referenced it here. It's not just that fewer Japanese are coming to the United States, there are just fewer Japanese going abroad overall. And so you see for the English language countries, right? United States, UK, Australia, Canada, for example, pretty similar trajectories, different numbers, of course, right? But similar trajectories over time. So the Japan and the US case are quite different. But I think you're right, we have to get below the surface here to get at some of these incentive structures that are producing the idea of going abroad.
If I can just walk the boat really briefly, please. I was reading an article in the Times Higher Education online recently, listing the best degrees in terms of undergraduate employment opportunities in the UK, this is again. And Japanese studies was listed third. Medicine, dentistry, Japanese studies. I'm afraid I can't say more than that. You can prove anything with statistics, I know, but it was certainly right up there as being, if getting a job at the end of your degree is what you're looking at, Japanese studies came third. I won't draw any conclusions.
Would it be Japanese investment in UK?
Sorry?
Would it be Japanese investment in UK?
Partly, yeah. And certainly
more jobs in UK really related to Japan.
Okay.
Thank you very much. I'm Allison Chang. I'm an intern at USJI and a student at Georgetown University. So I recently read in the newspaper that Rakuten has stated that all employees will be speaking English within the office now. And the article stated that there's a lot of complaints for two reasons. First, there's decreased productivity for operating in an unfamiliar language. And second of all, it goes against Japanese culture and uniqueness. And so I was wondering what the panel thought about switching completely to English as Rakuten and Akita International University has done, and whether this is the most effective way of globalizing Japan and improving English skills of Japanese people. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Dr. Williams, do you have something to say?
Okay. So in terms of, well, I have argued that actually it's kind of similar to what I talked a little bit. Do we want to give lectures in English? In Japan, of course. And what I agreed with my mentor, like I talked in my talk, is probably for graduates. For graduate school, for engineering especially, probably it is better if we could teach in English. But to make it happen is quite difficult. In reality. Well, this is the case for, I think if I remember correctly, Sweden is employing this system. And for undergrad, probably it is not very suitable because, so she said, basically, probably, we will get just a shallow knowledge of education. So, but for graduate, I think it is a good policy to change it from Japanese to English, but I don't know how hard it is.
I recently heard actually that the CEO of Rakuten, Mikitani-san, had a meeting with his managers, and he said, "This is really important, so I'm going to tell you in Japanese." So I'm not quite sure how. Another time he said, "No English, no job" as well. So I'm not. Maybe he'll have to fire himself. I'm not sure. But I think you have to see the Rakuten case as quite kind of within the context of that business. At the moment, only 1% of Rakuten's business comes from overseas, although it's like the third biggest kind of internet retailer in the world, and it aims to have 70%. So it's hiring very much from very, very, very many sources outside Japan. So within the context of aiming to have 70% of its profits from overseas, it is important that English is spoken very well, of course. So you can understand it. Of course, some people have called it, quote, insane. Other business leaders in Japan have said that. And I think we'll just have to watch and see, because it's obviously a very, perhaps brave move. But within the context of that business, it does make a certain sense, I think. But time will tell, I suppose.
Yeah. So in that sense, probably Rakuten is a good test bed.
Yeah. Thank you very much. We have exceeded 5 minutes, but since you are standing in front of the microphone,
thank you. And Uniqlo also is making this change.
Yeah.
But then one thing on the side, there was a discussion among ministers between India and Pakistan. And the Pakistani turned to the Indians and said, "You were smart, you stuck with English. And so you're plugged into the global economy right away." And Pakistan is sort of left behind. But, I'm surprised. I come from business and now I'm in the university. It's not hard for companies to make the change. They just have to make the change once. And then they just switch the cycle from then on. It's harder for universities because of the feeder systems and professors don't like to change. And it seems what you have to do is get a critical mass at the universities to all agree to make the change together so the companies will just make the switch. So how far along is that kind of discussion? Can I realistically say 2 years from now, the Japanese calendar might start in September? And so since you're inside these universities, I'm curious.
Can I just, I am not inside the university, so I shouldn't speak at all, but the Japanese fiscal year, as you know, begins on April 1. So it's not just a question of what can be change that can be generated from the university level, and I think, therefore, it is going to be these questions of gap terms or bridging mechanisms, or companies change their hiring practices to not connect with the Japanese fiscal year, and I think that's a really fundamental question. That's a big change. That's not just about merging intellectual or academic or educational goals, but if your whole country's fiscal year begins on April 1, and your hiring and firing is organized around that fiscal year end and start, I think therein lies, I think, the challenge for the educational institutions. But so you guys should comment more on that.
No, I was just say there is a model for it. I mean, the UK financial year starts in April, the academic year starts in September. So, I mean, you can do it. I mean, not that the UK is the best economic model, but it is feasible. Yeah.
But I think the short answer to your question is no. In 2 years' time,
No.
Todai isn't promising us a decision within, I think, 5 years, they're saying.
Yeah.
For implementation.
5 years. Isn't Waseda
Implementation within 5 years. Waseda.
Uchida-san's not here to tell us.
He knows what it is.
Waseda has already started the September entrance partially for the international students. And so we do both April and September admissions. So it's same.
But I do know there are major conversations going on with Keidan and the sort of business grouping. And as I said in my presentation, that's the culture shift that needs to come together.
To change. It's easy for them to change. Just tradition.
But yes, in theory, but in reality, again, we need to be careful about what's said, but some companies may change more than others.
Sure.
And some cultures may find that institutional change in companies, in terms of head office change, easier than others. And I think there are big questions in Japan about leadership in that way.
And also, I think the question is a question of graduation. Maybe 99.9% of students are supposed to graduate in March. But if you look at the quality, unfortunately, some are very smart, some are not very well. They are not qualified. But we, from faculty point of view, we have to let them graduate in March because they only found job starting from April. So probably if we succeeded in making this more flexible, probably that will work better.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for questions, and thank you very much all the panelists for very informative and insightful presentations. Thank you very much. So we will begin the next session at as scheduled, 3:20. So we have 10 minutes break.